Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a pretty packed house, virtual house, so we can discuss the New Jersey regulations. As many of you saw, and I'm sure you've all read through them, New Jersey's Cannabis Regulatory Commission last week released their regulations for its new adult use market. Hooray! So we've been able to assemble this all-star team to discuss them. So I'm going to start with some introductions. My name is Jennifer Cabrera. I am counsel with the New Jersey office of Vicente Sederberg LLP. We are a national law firm. We focus exclusively on the cannabis industry, founded in Denver in 2010. So we've been doing this a long time. And we've had our New York and New Jersey offices since 2019, which is when I joined. I handle licensing for our state. And I will turn it over to our panel to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with, the order is all changed. I'm going to start with Ed DeVeaux.
Thank you very much, Jen. A pleasure to being with everyone once again. Hi, I'm Ed DeVeaux. I'm the president of the New Jersey Cannabis Association. We're the state's first and largest trade association established for the development of a responsible, sustainable, diverse, and profitable cannabis industry. I actually started off in the association as its policy advisor, and I became its president December 2020. After the New Jersey voters made it clear that legalization was something that we wanted and needed in New Jersey. Glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm also joined by my colleague in New Jersey, Heather Kumer.
Hi, I'm Heather Coomer. I am a counsel at Vicente Sederberg. My focus is mainly land use, real estate, and municipal. I've worked in the public and private practice for both in Jersey City doing real estate development, and then also working for the Jersey City Redevelopment Agency of doing community development as well. I joined the firm this past year.
Thank you. And we are very lucky to have with us Mayor Janice Kovach.
Hi, thanks. And thanks for including me. So I am mayor for the town of Clinton out in Hunterdon County, but I am also the current president of the New Jersey League of Municipalities, representing all 565 municipalities throughout the state. So again, thanks for having me here.
Awesome. And last but not least, joining us from the Caribbean, Mr. Johnson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tahir Johnson. I'm the Director of Social Equity and Inclusion at the US Cannabis Council and Marijuana Policy Project. I'm happy that we have legalization here now in New Jersey. As someone who was born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey, this is a special moment, especially having seen the way that the war on cannabis has impacted our communities. So I'm really excited to be here with all these great speakers to share with you all today.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming out. It's really the best panel I can imagine being on. So I think we can dispense with the slides for now and just make this a free-flowing conversation because there were 160 pages of regulations to come out. So first question for the group, are we surprised they beat their deadline?
Totally surprised.
Right? Go Jersey. Go commission.
Well, you know what it is? It's a new state commission, so they didn't understand that New Jersey never meets statutory deadlines.
Someone should tell them. Better yet, we don't tell them.
Right, absolutely.
Keep it coming. Great work, guys. So the first topic that I think we can kick off with, so the regulations, again, deal just with adult use, right? Nothing to do with medical, and they're not complete. They're in effect now. These will be subject to change because they have to be readopted within the year. So let's talk about some of the things that are in there. First off, there is priority application review. So what are we thinking? Like, does it go far enough, not far enough? Ed?
You know, I was very pleased when the Regulatory Commission actually made it public that they were prioritizing minority, micro, disadvantaged community licenses. My concern as the head of the state's Cannabis Chamber of Commerce has always been how do we implement policy and how do we implement the business, the industry, so that we maximize opportunities for New Jerseyans and for small and minority businesses. And I think that their prioritization does exactly what we need. I actually, in my statement following the adoption of the regs, I applauded what they did. Just to take a step back, look, they worked under a very tight deadline. Their heads were down. We didn't hear a lot from them, and I know that concerned a lot of people over the months that we weren't hearing a lot. They canceled a meeting, and I know that scared the heck out of people. But ultimately, what they had done was they did a good thing. And so I think prioritizing those classes of licenses will generate not only interest, but it will generate a number of applicants that will actually impact the main streets of our communities, not just communities of impact, but the main streets of several communities around the state. So again, I think it's a good idea. We support that notion and expect to see a lot of entrepreneurs getting involved.
Absolutely. And I would just follow that up and say I was super pleased to see that as well. Like Ed said, them prioritizing social equity, but doing it in so many different ways where they're looking out for social equity businesses, diversely owned businesses, impact zone businesses, to make sure that so many people from those communities have multiple ways to participate and qualify for the programs. Another thing, just the fact that there was no qualified amount of income. There was no real estate requirement. Those are things that give social equity people such a leg up. I mean, it was just, like I said, I was really pleased to see that they took the time and attention to come out with so many things the way that they did as well.
Awesome. So to break it down for our listeners, there are a few different categories of social equity, what constitutes a social equity applicant. So there is the quote unquote social equity applicant. These are folks that have lived in a disadvantaged community for 5 of the last 10 years that either hit an income threshold, I think it's 80% of the state average, is it? Or have a conviction. Do we think there are going to be a lot of applicants that qualify and are able to take advantage of that?
You know, I don't think we're going to have a shortage of applicants. And Tahir and I we've exchanged LinkedIn messages, and it's great to be with him now. And clearly, I know that Mayor Janice is looking at this as well. It's not so much the fact that I don't think we're going to have a shortage. I think it becomes a question of qualifications. And what we really have to make sure in order for this industry to be successful is that we don't have a ton of failures from the start. I think that working together, what we do is create the infrastructure so that if you are eligible as a social equity or a micro license applicant, that you have the wherewithal to get into the industry and be successful. That becomes our biggest concern, not the number, but the ability to succeed.
And that's not the only category of applicant that gets priority review, right? There are also diversely held businesses, and this means businesses that have a certification from the state that they're minority owned, women owned, or disabled veteran owned. So what do we think? I mean, it's hard to get certification if you're not already an operational business. Is the commission setting the bar too high here?
I don't know. I think there's an opportunity. I'm hoping I'm going to, they met their deadline. So now I'm going to be extremely hopeful. I'm doing the glass half full that they will have the ability to get those individuals through a process to get the certifications that they need. We know this is a new industry, so this can't be measured the same way you would measure anything else, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Definitely, it needs to cut the red tape and just have an expedited process for these new businesses to eliminate those sort of barriers. Because even if someone qualifies, as you mentioned, just having the time or the time it takes to get that qualification, to get the certification, and also if you're not up and running and you don't qualify for it, that's a huge problem. So be able to make exceptions and to cut the red tape for an expedited process to help alleviate that barrier and remove that barrier would be great. And just to kind of piggyback on like what Ed was saying before, is that we need to really set people up for success. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen unless there's like proper training for social equity, diversity, and even the impact zone, because it's such a new industry. We really need some sort of training sessions and educational programs available, much like they have in other states that are not held by a private company, but more done through. We already have the means and the organizations to do so, like the New Jersey Economic Development Corporation can do it. They've done it for small businesses before. So it's already an existing infrastructure that the CRC could implement if need be.
Yep, absolutely. And in other states like Massachusetts, they have actually made it a simplified process to get MBE or the equivalent certification. Because in other states, like you do have to be in business for a certain amount of time. New Jersey, that's not the case. So it seems to be if you can check these boxes, you're in good shape. And then finally, there's so many things in there, it's hard to just go through it quickly. So priority review for also businesses that are located in an impact zone or owned by people who live in an impact zone. It's great. Then there's also priority for micro businesses and conditional licenses. I was on a LinkedIn chat with a number of people. Mike Hoffman, thanks for setting that up during the commission meeting, where there was a reaction of like, it seems like conditional licenses seem to be the gold standard. Like, do we think a lot of people are going to be going for those?
Yeah, I do think so. Just because the biggest problem, I think, in the past application rounds, and especially since the litigation for 2019, caused a lot of difficulties with holding property. And the costs associated with holding property with that. The conditional licenses allow you to apply without having a formal municipal and zoning board local zoning board approval, as well as a final site location. So when you're dealing,
but you want a site location, right?
You want a site location, but it's like instead of having an LOI, when you're doing your initial application, you would have to put in a lease and a deed at that point to finalize and to complete to transition from conditional to like a complete license. So for people that don't want to spend money to enter into a lease and to buy a deed for the purposes of right away because they don't have the funding, or it provides them a lot more flexibility. The other issue mainly is now you're required to do local land use approvals. We didn't have so many ordinances before for medicinal. Now it's a completely different boat. A lot of these places are doing conditional uses, which always require like going to the planning board. And municipalities already have a packed agenda usually in these planning board applications. So in a good scenario, you're looking at 3 months to just even get heard in front of the planning board. So having the conditional license to apply prior to having to put in those municipal and local zoning approvals is very helpful.
Mayor Kovach, what do you think, like a lot of, from your perspective, do towns prefer dealing with a conditional applicant versus an annual applicant, or
I think this is going to be something new. There's initial, obviously conditional, everyone gets a little nervous right away because there's no requirement from the municipality. What I would hope is that anyone applying for even a conditional license has identified a community that is open and is interested, not just, we're doing the conditional license and we're going to go into this town and then come in after the conditional has been approved to say, okay, now we've got this conditional license, we want to come here. Because that kind of creates an adversarial conversation versus, everything can be happening in tandem, but that conversation needs to take place. The CRC has given municipalities broad power, and, we all want to do this right. But again, this is a brand new business. We need to, and we've just spent the last 18 months dealing with a pandemic. So everyone else is playing catch up. While, a lot of us have been working on this, others have not had the time to focus. So there's that learning curve that not only elected officials, but even local residents need to understand. They checked yes on the box, but if you ask them, not all of them said, they don't realize that means like, oh, I could have it in my community, which we all know. I mean, and that's not specific to cannabis. I mean, the NIMBY mentality is regarding anything. It's like, once I'm here, I want nothing else to come in. So I think that's where my concerns would be from a conditional. Like, this needs to be a partnership from the very beginning. There needs to be buy-in on both sides. There needs to be this relationship that, as an elected official, I'm confident when I go to my constituents to say, yes, this is an operator we want to bring in. They may not have a location yet. They're interested in town, but this is who fits in our community.
Yeah, so you don't want to just get your conditional approval from the state without talking to the town. Like, first of all, the state may not even approve that, because I think they need to send it to the community and get an okay within 28 days, right?
Yep.
So you really want the town already familiar with you and willing to have this conversation.
It's interesting, and I appreciate the mayor's comments. And I know we've been on other panels together, and so some of our guests may have already heard. But the success of the industry lies greatly in the fact that they are part of the fabric of the community that they reside in. So whether it's a cultivation facility or dispensary or manufacturing, it has got to be part of the fabric. And so the continuity of commerce in a particular community means a whole lot. So the mayor makes an excellent point about don't fall into this potential pitfall of I can grab a conditional and I can just go anywhere I like. That's something, and I'm sure Heather will chime in on, you can't go anywhere you like.
No, you can't. And it's still, you're going to set yourself up for a big mistake and a lot of lost time, money, if you're going to try to play that game, or what I like to say is like try playing cute with that. The municipalities are a lot smarter, more onto it than you think for everything. And like, they've been dealing with very complex development issues and controversial development issues for a long time, and this is not any different. So I recommend having meetings with municipal officials, but also meeting with community groups and neighborhood associations are completely key. Because even if your council or the mayor is approving of it, if your neighbor doesn't approve of it and the neighborhood group doesn't approve of it, you're going to have a hard time. Because in the end, especially when you're dealing with a municipality that does it as a conditional use, it can get, it's pretty broad where you can get denied. And if you have a lot of people speaking out against you, that's going to be a hard time for you. So get your ducks in a row and make some friends with your neighbors.
And this is even for conditional applicants, you're saying. So
I
it
would
sounds like
say
real benefit of the conditional application, other than priority review from the state, is that it gives you time for the municipal approval and zoning approval at the back end.
Yes.
Like, you already have a tentative yes, but you just haven't sealed the deal. Is that basically it?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Because again, it's like, even if you have a completed application for getting into the planning board, and you might not be on that agenda for like 2 months, depending on what other projects they're dealing with. Even if you have everything completed, and that's, you can't really skip the line. So that's where, and thankfully the conditional use, once you receive a conditional license, you have 120 days to get all those approvals. You can also get an extension for 45 days as well. And so for me, that's like when you're literally on the agenda like 3 months from now, or if there's any sort of issues like that, is what you're dealing with. You shouldn't be going at it with a conditional license application of being like, oh, I'm just going to save everything until like the state says it's okay, and then I'm going to start from scratch to get all this other stuff done for local and municipal approvals. No, you got to start at the same time. You just have to it gives you more of the elongated, extension of timeline to get those local approvals that you don't really have control over the agendas. So one question I have for Mayor Kovach, and let me set it up just for those listening. So New Jersey, as you've probably gathered from this by this point, has a great deal of local control. So we're looking at a system that's more akin to Massachusetts or California than what we're going to have in New York, or than what you see in like other states where it's just at the state level and towns don't really have that much say. So towns here can issue local licenses. In fact, you may have to go through a competitive RFP with your town before you even go to the state and figure out, is the town going to back you or not? So my question for Mayor Kovach is, do you think, then, of the towns that have opted in, are most of them going to have like local licensing or competitive processes?
Absolutely. Definitely local licensing.
Okay.
I think that it'll be interesting whether it becomes competitive when we see how many are actually, if there's a flood of requests. I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet. I know that there have been a number of outside, MSOs who are, looking around, who've had conversations with a number of municipalities. So, but I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that the more competitive is when we get to the micro licensing and we're looking at our local residents or community members who are interested in starting these businesses, because that's a much smaller investment. So you might see more of those. But there's definitely going to be local licensing requirements. I think that is something that they've all talked about. Now, so, there's no guidelines in the rules that say you can't, and there's not a kind of a range as far as, what's reasonable. So I think what you're going to see are, some licensing applications that go anywhere from, maybe $2,000 or $3,000 as high as $50,000 or $75,000. And then that's up to the operator whether or not they're interested in going, into those communities. And those communities may then, relook at it if they don't have anyone coming in. But there is definitely going to be a local process to it.
And, Mayor, I thank you for that response. And it was honest and to the point. And here's where I think I'm going to get in trouble, and Heather, be ready to dig me out. Look, I appreciate the fact that there is a sense of letting municipalities kind of control their own destiny. I think that's fine. When it comes to the separate RFPs and the separate licensing, two things. One is I've already had to answer the question from some potential applicants saying, well, I'm going to get a license, and they're talking about the municipal license. And I have to correct them and say, well, you may get a municipal license or approval, and I try to steer them towards approval, but only the state can issue you a license to operate in the cannabis industry. So be very clear on that. Yes. The second issue is I do akin the local licensing practices somewhat to, I would say, Mount Laurel. It's redlining. You absolutely discriminate against certain classes of licenses when you create a licensing scheme that is in the tens of thousands of dollars. And I'll be honest, I have begun to talk with attorneys, Heather and Vicente Sederberg and others about a potential Mount Laurel suit or a Mount Laurel style suit. You can't redline in this industry. And so I have had this conversation with the CRC as well. if I'm not mistaken, I think that there is some language there where it talks about either consistent fees or
Reasonableness.
reasonable, right? And so I think what we will do is we're going to rest our hats on that and maybe have to reel some of these municipalities in to some degree. It's redlining, it's discriminatory, and it was really not good for the industry or certain communities. I totally get it. You do it because you can, but you've also got to be responsible.
I don't disagree. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had this conversation a number of times. Part of it is when we were first looking at this, we were looking at a tax revenue that municipalities thought was going to be a little bit more than what it currently is. I understand that it's been limited at from the different licenses. So we're there, but there's also the, municipalities looking at revenue. Ultimately we can only offset our tax base for our residents is by bringing in revenue. And since we don't get to actually collect anything other than property taxes and miscellaneous revenue, this is another avenue. It's the same thing with host agreements and whether or not host agreements are going to, what would be considered, irresponsible as far as what you're asking for. And the other side of it is what, MSO or operator is willing to pay it. And if they're willing to pay it, that's the other side of it too. It's hard.
I'm just going to comment there. It's so one of the things is in Massachusetts, they started off like New Jersey too, where they let the municipalities have full range of local licensing, and it resulted in a lawsuit that had instilled caps and regulations where it stopped the municipalities and they couldn't charge over a certain amount. It was all pretty much uniform. I can see that happening to New Jersey. When you're commenting with MSOs, yeah, those are the people that can afford it. But the intention of the bill is really the social equity and diversity, and having high fees is creating other barrier. I would say reasonableness should be very similar to development fees. If your application fee is like 10 times more than people pay for a regular real estate, like a regular site plan development application fee, then you are not reasonable. So, I mean, there are already measures in place where you can kind of evaluate your fees. This is, again, I always say this, you have to treat this like any other site plan application. That's my message to municipalities. Like, just pretend this is like another business. It could be growing cabbage for all you know. Like, it's just, you have to think of it like that. You shouldn't be treating it any other way. And by having these crazy $50,000, $75,000 fees, first off, I don't think anybody's going to go to your town. I don't see that. And also, like, the people that do, I don't know if they're going to be the best neighbors, because you really don't think of it just as fees that you're collecting, but also like what community benefits can they actually get to your neighborhood? There's other ways to make a positive impact besides just throwing money out of town, and where it can really be helpful. I mean, New Jersey, you could talk to any town, I'm sure they all have issues with school funding, for example, and any sort of recreational activities. Those are like the two ones that always get discussed. And they all have issues with small businesses and COVID. There are other creative solutions to provide much needed amenities to your residents where you're not charging $75,000 in an application fee.
Well, we shall see. One thing is certain is that the municipalities are the gatekeepers here. They hold so much power under the law and under the regulations. It'll be interesting to see. And we had, like, just a couple weeks ago, New Brunswick was talking about doing an RFP. It didn't end up happening. But do we think those are going to start popping up in September, or do you think they'll wait till state licensing starts?
I tend to think that they will be in place before September or during September. In fact, here's my crystal ball is I actually think we will start seeing RFAs after like this 30-day cooling period after the regs. I think that it will be easy enough. I think you'll see the 2019 applicants named, licenses named also in September. So I think a lot of things happen then. But I think in preparation, municipalities will in fact engage in their licensing processes or their approval processes, and they'll be doing so because, look, it's important to them, and they want to know who it is that's either buying or leasing or spreading rumors about how they're going to come to his or her town. So I think it happens earlier rather than later.
I would hope the process is in place. I mean, it's so important for us to kind of get back in the game and get ahead of it so that no one is blindsided by it. You know, 2 years from now, this is going to be the norm because businesses will be there. They'll be open. Everyone will get used to it. This next 24 months, I think, is going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot of fits and starts. There's going to be, you know, towns that will just still kind of take a wait and see approach. There'll be others that will start having conversations that have opted out, but are looking to try and find the right partner to write the ordinances to fit the right partner. You know, I think that's really, from all the ones that listen, there's always going to be bad actors on both sides, right? You're going to have your bad actors in the industry. You're going to have your bad actors in the municipalities. Overall, I think we're dealing with, you know, trying to come to a understanding of what it is we're dealing with, getting your residents comfortable. You know, our board just approved a warehouse for Christmas trees, and the meeting was multiple meetings because, you know, we were going to have all of these massive fires because we had artificial Christmas trees. You know, people have had time to really sit and think about what's coming in, especially with a lot of people working from home. So, you know, I think this is just kind of going to add to it as well. It takes time. We'll get there, and we'll continue to have these conversations. And I think it's important, you know, to have the both sides of the aisle and to understand. Me personally, I want to see more of the micro licenses. I want to see more of the social equity. I have nothing against the MSOs, but I'd much rather see community members have an opportunity in this new industry than a VC from California or Canada, you know, to come in and build something. And that's not to say that they're bad individuals, but I want to see my own community benefit. I want to see the communities that surround me benefit from this new industry. So, you know, that's really where a lot of my push is going to be going.
Absolutely. One of the things I've liked the most about New Jersey's law is the micro business section. I think it's a really noble idea. I think that it really encourages small businesses being able to take advantage and get a foot in the door, because you know the market is going to change once federal legalization comes. That's something that we don't want to talk about or think about, but it is going to change the way things work, because will there be as much of a need for local cultivation and processing if cannabis can cross state lines and come from the West Coast? So isn't a goal here to develop our own market that is vibrant, that can withstand some shocks like that? That's my take. So for micro businesses, Ed, do you think the way they've defined it, we're 2,500 square feet for grow canopy, is that sufficient for micro growers? Can you do much with that?
I think the intent and it was very principled intent on how we develop micro licenses and micro licensing language. The intent, which is principled, is number one, lower the bar to entry into the industry. Not everyone can go for a 20,000 square foot facility. Some people can only go for a 2,000 or 2,500 square foot facility. So it lowers the bar to entry. It lowers risk. From what I understand, and I've spoken with growers, there's a lot that you can do in that space. The way technology has evolved in this industry in a very short time, the amount of space needed to produce a fine plant is a lot less than what it used to be. They're using a lot less water now. Lighting is different. So I think that at 2,500 square feet, you give someone an opportunity to enter the industry, lower financial bar. There still is a financial bar, but it's a lot lower. And you also have a lot less risk. So if something were to go wrong with the 2,000 square feet, losing 2,000 square feet of crop is a heck of a lot different than losing 20,000 square feet of crop. And so I think it was well-intentioned. I think that there's an opportunity. And then as the law and the regulations go, you can become a conventional license following a success as a micro license. So you do have the opportunity to expand. You do have the opportunity to grow. And I think that for some people, it's a great start. Some people are a mom and pop store before they become a larger store. So I support that idea. And I think it will benefit a lot of communities and a lot of individuals.
I mean, if you think about it, New Jersey has over 300 towns that have less than 10,000 residents. So we are made up of nothing but small communities, or majority.
Right. It's tough though, because the requirement that you have to live in the community where you're applying for your license or one of the surrounding towns, like New Jersey, there are places where you can't swing a cat without running into another municipality. Like we have a lot of towns.
Yeah.
How does that? Are we just asking for people to get burner apartments? Like, I don't know how this works.
You know, it's funny because I know people are concerned, especially with the opt-out scenario. Look, my conversations with communities that were looking at, hey, what do we do leading up to August 21st, which became August 19th. Way to go, guys. The issue was, and the conversations went like this. We are opting out for now because we want to see the regulations. And I can't fault a community. Look, the community's been here for 200 years. And so how do you continue that success? And it's not by just being frivolous with your decisions. So most of the conversations I have had were that they were being very thoughtful about what they were doing, because they want to opt in, but they want to opt in a thoughtful, methodical way, so that the industry can be a success in their towns.
One other thing I wanted to flag about micro businesses, I saw there was a comment from the prolific Michael Hoffman. Look at the definitions in the regulations for premises and physical plant, because premises includes the whole building, right? It includes offices, kitchens, restrooms, storerooms. That is to be distinguished from the physical plant, which is the spaces, equipment, and infrastructure directly used by the business within the premises that's authorized by the Act. So it's like, basically, those are the parts of the business that's plant touching, that's regulated. So the 2,500 square feet for growers, that's their canopy. There's a question I have about whether it's mature plants or all plants. Anyone have any quick hot takes on that question? No.
I mean, as far as the canopy side, if you could stack it up, because you're still restricted to like a 2,500 square foot facility, that is not a defined term. That's obviously, it's different than premises. So, I mean, you can kind of take other way, where it's like, if you can say that the facility is not the premise and that the premise, I mean, I'm a ladies attorney, so I'm like, we're used to like,
they do define it.
They do define facility?
Yeah. The micro business facility shall include all areas within the premises that are part of the physical plant. It excludes restrooms. It excludes your kitchen, possibly storeroom. Not clear.
So that's really great to know, because when you're talking about an expansion after a year, why on earth would you like tie up a property, outfit a property for 2,500 square feet, only to expand it in a year? It doesn't make any sense. So having that provision, I think, is very helpful for people and kind of can open up the possibility for having people that are interested in doing microcultivation actually enter that field. That's great.
Yep. No, definitely. I think that I was pleased to see how they defined it, and hopefully they interpret those words in an expansive way. Moving on, some of the noteworthy issues in the regulations. There was a request in the comments to discuss the rules on edibles. So, quick primer. In New Jersey, we don't have edibles, we have ingestibles. Don't get it wrong. So, ingestibles can be chews. They can be oils, tinctures, lozenges, chews. Chews, ingestibles they cannot resemble food, and they cannot resemble a trademarked good. So even though the regulations don't say this, the summary makes clear that it can't be a cookie or a brownie. And the commission has been talking about this, I feel like, at their recent meetings. So this is clearly an issue that matters to them. But what about the fact that we are excluding a lot of foods? Ed, what do you think? What does this mean for the market?
You know, I think Mayor Kovach hit the nail on the head to digress just a few moments ago. People are still getting used to the notion of legalized cannabis. I honestly think that the commission has, with its responsibility of not only meeting citizen concerns, but commercial concerns, had to strike a balance. And I think in this first year, because remember, we come back next year with revisions to the regs. I think in this first year, they chose to address citizen concerns and balance it with commerce by saying, look, let people get used to the idea of a dispensary in their neighborhood on Main Street and not have to ask the question, what about the children? Or oh my God, what about the seniors? And you know, look, and I don't mean to be facetious, but God forbid there's the uptick in emergency room visits, which happened in Colorado, which happened in other legalized states, only because people were not used to the kind of curious got involved and they didn't feel well. They didn't know what they were experiencing, only to go to an emergency room, drink water, and go back home. And so all we need is, you know, the one instance of the gummy or the brownie or the cookie and an emergency room visit, and all of the naysayers, all of those that oppose legal, well, it was a minority, obviously, but those who oppose would say, you see, I told you so. This is why it shouldn't be. So let the first year come and go without the fear and with education, without fear and with education as to what ingestibles, what edibles, and all of that really means. And I think that they did a good job of saying, let's get people used to the notion of the industry and of the commerce, and we do that by handling citizen concerns.
Fair enough. I hope they do change it after a year. I'm not saying they need space cakes. Like, this doesn't need to become Amsterdam in the 90s.
Right, right. Well, hey, why not? Anyway.
Or they'll be swinging cats.
but it's interesting when we look at there were some very vocal professionals with respect to packaging. Dr. Nathan is wonderful at discussing these things. Ken Walski, another health professional. There are healthcare professionals that have looked at packaging, not just in New Jersey, but on a national level. And so they are working on these things. So look, we will address it. I think the labeling issue, the packaging, child-proof safety and things like that, it all is in this evolutionary process in New Jersey. again, I think the CRC handled it well, best they could, coming out of the gate, knowing what we're going to be dealing with later.
Agreed.
And I see I'm getting messages from my colleague, Jen Flanagan, who was a former commissioner in Massachusetts, one of the original commissioners, a strong public health background. And she's telling me that strong public health regulations can really help citizen concerns, and that when you are going to the ER, like if there is a warning label there, it can really help them identify. And so that's why it really does help figuring out, is this from a licensed facility or is this black market? So you're spot on, Ed. This is a great point.
You know, and also, and please, because I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be right on this, but I did see the vape question. It's essentially the same thing, right? Mayor Kovach, I'm sure the proliferation of smoke shops prior to cannabis, you know, the concern was, are they carding people? We know that dispensaries card, right? It's 100% ID check. So I feel great about that. But smoke shops and vapes, and the fact that vapes in the traditional sense have not been good for young people. They're not good. And so we tend to downplay this notion of vapes. But for health, public health and public safety, right?
Definitely. And you know what, you touched on a really good point too, is that, you know, you have to show an ID. It's so hard, and there's so much security of proof that you have to go into a dispensary. It's not, I always like to say, because I'm from the DARE generation, which is that, you know, drug dealers don't look for your license. They don't look at your ID. You have to go through massive amount of security to get into a dispensary. And I think that actually alleviates a lot of concerns coming out from municipalities, and also for concerned residents as well. There's actually like data that shows that areas are safer with a dispensary there because there's so much security that's required. And then when you're talking about these vape pens, I mean, I just keep on thinking about that Hoboken vape pen. So if people were buying it from a vape pen, this is not going to be for the dispensaries. It's a massive amount of security these kids, you would have to go through. So you're not going to have that underage illegal market going in to a dispensary. They have to scan your license, everything. It's not as simple. It's harder than getting to a bar to buy alcohol.
Absolutely. There's so many. There are often multiple ID checks when you first get in, when you get to the counter to pay. There are cameras everywhere. This is not an easy place to target, number one, as a burglar, but also as an underage person. I mean, this is not something you can circumvent easily. And as a mother, I personally feel like I'm happier this is a regulated industry, and that's not easily accessible. Like, if it's not available when my boys are in high school, I'll be happier about that. Just to turn pearl clutching for a minute.
Right there with you. I've got my two going to college, so.
Yeah, you got them this far. Good work. I know we're running out of time, and so one thing I saw, well, I'm just going to touch on a few things before I turn over a few questions to the group. Number one, ownership rules. Very interesting. So you can have up to one of each license type, and management services agreements, the management contractor can't have a license. So you can have, as a management contractor, you can contract with up to 5 license holders. Okay, there are limits on what can go in that contract. There's a term limit on it. It has to be up to 5 years. It cannot give the management contractor an ownership stake, and that management contractor can't have a license of its own. Does this address some of the concerns that you've had, that you've very publicly shared, Ed, over the last few months?
Oh, absolutely. You actually feel good when your concerns are actually addressed. So going back to early conversations, and this deals with how small and micro businesses, how do you access capital in this industry, right? The notion that, oh my God, I can't go to a bank, I can't get capital, therefore I have to rely on these other sources of capital. And I'll be honest, I was concerned and opposed to original legislation that allowed out-of-state entities to come in and not only provide capital, which, by the way, were loans. They're not grants; they're loans. You're going to have to pay it back, but also allowed for equity in the business that you were giving money to. Scared me to death, and so I'm glad to see that the CRC begins to address it by canceling out some of these notions that you're going to have entities just saying, well, I'm going to invest in this, and before you know it, they're franchising. And so it prevents that, and I'm glad to see that the CRC addressed that. Look, I'm all about helping the small businesses. I want them to be successful, but I also want the industry to be careful about how capital enters the market. And so we do need protections. And I'm also glad, and I'll end here with the notion that came up in the meeting where they introduced the regs, that the CRC is committed to monitoring these financial agreements and these management agreements, and that they're going to be watching. So I applaud them for that. Absolutely. And they want to review these contracts before they come into effect. They don't want backroom deals. That is abundantly clear from the regs and what they've said. Right. There's also in the rules something that I really hope will be addressed, which is a ban on alternate names or DBAs. So it effectively says that a business can't use, display, advertise, or operate under an alternate name, including a DBA, which means that all of those companies out there that have named their company, if I created a company, it would be Cabrera Cannabis Holdings LLC. It means that I have to actually sell all my products as here is a Cabrera Cannabis Holdings LLC lozenge. Like, really? That can't be the intent. Like, does that mean GTI has to rename all of its dispensaries GTI or Green Thumb Industries? They can't be Rise anymore? And you had speculated that may not be the intent. No, I think the intent here is to prevent companies from filing for applications a dozen times across the state doing business as. Again, you will have the haves and the have-nots. And it's unfortunate that Tahir, I know he's on the road and couldn't be here, but I think he would agree that when we look at this industry and we look at the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are going to have a hard enough time getting the 2,500 square feet. And then you have a bunch of haves that are going to enter our market and say, well, I'm going to be company A in one town, company B in another, company C in a third, and so on. And so I think that doing business as, when we begin to peel the onion on some of these applications, that we will see and hopefully prevent people from just infiltrating the market and controlling the market almost in a franchise sense. So I think that that's the intent. Well, I sure hope the commission clears that up. And anyone listening, please, this is something that I think there's got to be universal agreement that are we getting rid of all brands in the state? It just doesn't make sense. So I think lobby the commission to clarify that. So turning it over to the group, and I'm going to start with Mayor Kovach. Ed thinks there will be 2019 licenses announced in the next month. You want to make a bet?
I'm done making bets. I'm not taking any more bets. I hope so. I really do. I mean, I think we and I completely understand the CRC's, the methodical approach that they're taking. But I do also feel for those who've applied for the licenses and have been waiting, I think, patiently. I think those licenses are going to be an opportunity for us to really see how it works in the communities. And if we get those licenses and businesses done right, it becomes much easier for the rest of the communities to kind of sign on and agree going forward. You know, that to me was a kind of an opportunity that I'm hoping we take advantage of. Like, let's focus there. Let's get them out. Let's give them the tools that they need to get operating, and then kind of watch it grow. But I'm not taking any more bets. I'm done taking bets. Obviously, I'm not good at it.
Heather, can I interest you in a bet?
Sure.
What do you think? Think they'll be announced next month?
I think that there's a good chance of it being announced. I think the biggest issue is going to be a lot of those applicants are going to, the ones that are winners. And by the way, when they are announced, I expect some sort of trophy, like an Oscar or red carpet, because these people have waited 2 years for this at this point. But there's also going to be a lot of revisions in that they're going to have to do for their applications, because 2 years ago, I don't know what their properties are like, if the team members are still there. I mean, we went through COVID, the pandemic has changed everything. You have no idea what the status of people are at. And so I hope that the CRC gives these winners the opportunity to revise or amend their application when they get their endorsement to go for the final step, because I can't imagine they're all going to be the exact same for when they entered it. So that's really going to be the test for me. Like, how much are they going to amend their applications afterwards? Probably a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and also like there's the issue that this could be the holdup for licensing everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? There were still all of these pending properties, these pending applications. So yeah, I'd say my money's on it coming out in the next month, but we'll see. It's not much money.
We'll go for ice cream then. So there we go.
Yeah,
we'll bet on ice cream.
We all win.
We all win ice cream.
Okay. Next question. Will these rules change? Ed.
Yes. Yes. I think looking at the last 180 days, my sentiment was you got to start somewhere. And I think we accomplished that. We have our starting point. And as a policy guy for all of my career, basically, rules, regulations, legislation, it was meant to be changed. It was meant to be adopted and then amended. So absolutely.
Mayor Kovach, you think these rules will change?
Yes. With everyone adding their input with what we learn as we implement the existing rules, we knew that was always going to be the case, that this was kind of the opening. And as we get closer and move forward, what mistakes have we made? All right, we need to go back and make those modifications. And it's important. These should always be living, breathing documents. Anything that you don't put as something that's always open to be modified becomes stale. It's like our land use board and our master plans. We're always updating them because it's so important. Again, what looks like now is going to be different 2 years from now.
Definitely.
Heather, you think so?
Oh, well, for sure. This is just the beginning of everything, especially there's so many different opportunities that New Jersey can enter into that I think this is just the beginning, especially allowing research licenses for pharmaceuticals, get those pharmaceutical companies back in New Jersey to start doing research and hiring. Huge one where the pharmaceutical belt shouldn't be lost. Business incubators, I would love to see. I think, but at the same time, this is just getting people's toes wet and getting used to it for this entire process because it's so brand new and to alleviate any sort of fear. So it's a step in the right direction, but we got a long way to go and I'm really excited for it.
All right. Well, we're at 2:00. We stuck to our time. Thank you so much, Ed DeVeaux, Mayor Janice Kovach, Heather Coomer, and so sad that Tahir wasn't able to stay for the whole thing. He is traveling and dealing with some unfortunate travel issues. So it was a shame to miss his input. but we'll have him on next time. So any parting words before we go to lunch?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jen, for organizing this. I always like to say one thing, though, at any of these panels, which is remind yourselves that New Jersey has the #1 highest racial disparity in incarceration rates in the country. So when we look at all these things, keep that in mind of when we tackle all these issues. And thank you again so much for everybody joining.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Our email addresses are here. Please feel free to get in touch. Have a great day.
Thanks. Take care.